The crying began before the wheels left the ground. Not loud at first, just a soft, strained whimper, barely noticeable over the usual boarding chaos. But as the plane began to taxi toward the runway, that soft cry morphed into something more. Not shrill, but raw. That kind of cry that doesn't come from annoyance or boredom, but something deeper. A cry with no language, only need. In seat 14C, Marissa Taylor exhaled sharply through her nose. She wasn't in uniform yet, just in a navy blue cardigan over a white blouse, her crew ID tucked discreetly into the pocket of her carry-on. She was deadheading on this flight, a term used in the industry when a flight attendant is flying as a passenger to reach her next assigned route. Which meant, technically, she wasn't on duty. Technically, she was just another tired soul at the end of a 4-day sequence, desperate to sleep, land, and leave. But rules never stopped people from looking at her like she was supposed to fix things. And now, just 2 seats ahead of her, in 12A, a baby, maybe 6 or 7 months old, was unraveling in his mother's arms. Marissa clenched her jaw. Babies didn't bother her. Not usually. But today was different. She'd already dealt with a delayed departure, an aggressive passenger on the last leg who called her a waitress, and a sleepless night in a motel with broken heat. She was stretched thin, emotionally brittle in a way she refused to admit, even to herself. The baby's wails grew louder. People were shifting now, subtly but unmistakably, glances exchanged, shoulders tensing, sighs escaping between clenched lips. She tried to focus on the page in her paperback. Something about resilience. Irony dripping from every word. But the baby's cries curled around her like smoke. And then she saw him. Seated beside the mother, seat 12B, was a man she hadn't noticed during boarding. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, in a fitted gray suit with no tie. Hands resting calmly on his lap. No phone. No book. Just still. Watching the mother with quiet eyes. He wasn't irritated. He wasn't shifting in his seat or making passive-aggressive sighs. He looked calm. Too calm. The mother was flustered. Trying to bounce the baby gently while shushing him, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, her eyes darting to the rows around her, as if silently apologizing for existing. She was young. Early 20s, maybe. Messy bun, oversized hoodie, dark circles under her eyes. Her fingers trembled. Marissa could feel the judgment brewing in the cabin air. Thick and unspoken, but present. And suddenly, before she even realized what she was doing, Marissa stood up. The plane was still idling. Passengers were fastening seatbelts. No one was paying close attention, and maybe that's why her next words came out sharper than she meant. Or maybe they came out exactly how she meant. "You need to calm your child," she said, voice low but firm, standing over the young mother like a reprimanding teacher. "Some of us are trying to rest." The girl's face turned pale, then red. She nodded quickly, fumbling with a pacifier from the side pocket of her bag. "I'm sorry," she whispered, breathless. "He's just teething, I think." Marissa didn't respond. She just turned and sat back down, her heart beating faster than she expected. The cries continued, but now there was something else beneath them, a tension that wrapped around the rows like static. And then came the voice. Low. Measured. Male. "I don't think that was necessary." It came from 2 rows ahead. From him. Marissa blinked. He didn't turn to look at her. Just spoke calmly, eyes still on the mother and child. "She's doing the best she can," he said, not harshly, not even confrontationally, but with that kind of clarity that cuts deeper than volume ever could. Marissa didn't reply. She wasn't sure she could. The plane began to move. By the time they were in the air, the baby had finally settled, exhausted from his own cries. The mother leaned back, eyes closed, lips slightly parted like she'd been holding her breath for hours. And the man, the one in the suit, gently reached into the seat pocket, pulled out a small cloth from his bag, and handed it to the mother. She looked confused at first, then grateful. It was a muslin burp cloth. Clean. Folded. "Just in case," he said, with a soft smile. Marissa watched this from behind, her stomach twisting in ways she didn't expect. Why had she said what she said? It hadn't been the baby. Not really. It had been something else. Something inside her. Something tired. Something wounded. And the moment she saw that girl, young, helpless, embarrassed, it was like watching a version of herself from a decade ago. The version who got pregnant at 19 and was told she had no business being a mother, or a flight attendant, or anything that required calm or grace. She had silenced that version of herself so hard, she no longer recognized her when she showed up in someone else. The seatbelt sign pinged off. She stood, as casually as she could, and walked to the lavatory, needing a moment to breathe. But as she passed row 12 again, something happened. The man looked up, met her gaze, and said, with quiet finality, "Empathy goes further than protocol." That's when she really saw him. The face. The posture. The way a flight attendant near the front had stood a little straighter when he boarded. The way the captain had discreetly nodded toward him earlier. And the realization hit like cold water down her spine. This wasn't just another passenger. This was Aaron Caldwell, founder, CEO, the youngest executive in the history of Northeast Air. And she had just scolded a struggling mother, right in front of the man who signed her paychecks. Her breath caught. The cabin felt colder now. Not because he'd raised his voice. Not because he'd threatened. But because he hadn't. And silence sometimes says more than anything else. Marissa spent the rest of the flight in a state of calculated stillness. She didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't open her book again. Her eyes stayed fixed on the seat back in front of her, as if there were something written there she needed to memorize to survive the next hour. The baby had fallen asleep against the mother's chest. The girl looked drained, like someone who had learned the hard way that no amount of preparation could keep life from breaking through the cracks. Aaron Caldwell hadn't said another word. That silence was louder than any confrontation. And yet, despite everything, there was no outburst. No report. No raised voice. No one called her name over the PA system or asked her to meet someone upon landing. That should have calmed her. But it didn't. Because Marissa wasn't afraid of being punished. She was afraid of what the mirror was now showing her. The plane began its descent into Denver. The weather outside was gray, the clouds thick like memory. Marissa kept glancing out the window, even though her seat didn't offer much of a view. She needed the distraction. Needed anything to drown the storm building in her chest. As the wheels touched down, the baby stirred but didn't cry. The cabin filled with the usual sounds, seatbelts unclipping, phones buzzing, people rustling into movement far too fast. But in row 12, there was stillness. That same impossible stillness. Marissa remained in her seat, waiting for most of the passengers to disembark. She couldn't face him in the aisle. Not after that moment. Not with the weight of her own voice still echoing in her ears. But fate doesn't ask for permission. As she stepped off the aircraft into the jet bridge, pulling her small carry-on behind her, she heard someone call her name. She turned. Aaron was standing there, coat over one arm, phone in his other hand. He wasn't smiling. But he wasn't cold either. "I'll be brief," he said. Her throat tightened. "Of course. I know you weren't on duty today. I know you've probably had a long week." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "But I need to say something," he continued, calm but firm. "That mother. She'll never forget how you made her feel on that flight." Marissa felt her breath grow shallow. Her fingers gripped the handle of her suitcase a little tighter. "She's not going to write a complaint," he added. "She's not going to cause trouble. People like her rarely do. But that moment, that look on her face? That lives inside someone longer than you'd expect." Marissa looked down. "I wasn't trying to embarrass her," she murmured. "I was just tired." "I believe you," he said. "But tired doesn't excuse cruelty. And that wasn't protocol, that was judgment. Quiet. Sharp. Dressed up as authority." She felt her face flush. No defense came. Just silence. And then, unexpectedly, his voice softened. "Do you have children, Marissa?" She hesitated. "No," she answered, then quickly corrected herself. "Not anymore." The air shifted between them. A pause. Heavy. Real. Aaron's expression changed, not into pity, but understanding. A flicker of something human. Something lived in. "I lost my daughter 5 years ago," he said. "Complications after birth. She never made it past day 2. Marissa blinked. The words cut through her like a whisper in a cathedral. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He nodded. "So am I. But here's the thing, when I hear a baby cry now, it doesn't annoy me. It doesn't irritate me. It reminds me that someone else's child lived. That their lungs worked. That they got to scream." She swallowed hard. Her own chest ached. "I've seen the world from both sides of that window," he continued. "The side where the crying keeps you up, and the side where you'd give anything to hear it again." Marissa couldn't breathe. Aaron stepped forward, but not threateningly. Just close enough to make sure she was truly listening. "I don't want to see a report," he said. "I don't want HR involved. But I need you to take this moment seriously. Not because you broke a rule, but because you broke a human." She nodded slowly. Shame blooming behind her eyes, full and hot. "Are you still flying tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, barely audible. "Back to Seattle." He glanced at his phone, then back to her. "I'll be on that flight." She raised her eyes. "You're?" "Yes. As a passenger." Again. Then he turned and walked away. No threats. No paperwork. No dramatic consequences. But his words stayed behind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. That night, Marissa couldn't sleep. Not because she was afraid of losing her job, but because for the first time in a long time, she questioned who she'd become. There had been a version of her once. Young, hungry, full of empathy. The kind who offered to hold passengers' babies while mothers used the restroom. The kind who carried extra granola bars in her bag just in case someone was too anxious to eat before boarding. Where had that woman gone? Maybe she hadn't vanished. Maybe she had been buried. Under layers of exhaustion. Disrespect. The small cruelties of the job. The passengers who shouted, the managers who shrugged, the days that never seemed to end. But tonight, the mirror was clean. And Marissa couldn't look away. The next morning, everything looked the same. The gate announcements, the buzz of early travelers, the smell of burnt coffee and recycled air. But Marissa felt different. She stood at the crew station, straightening her scarf, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt, as if maybe, just maybe, looking polished enough could dull the noise inside her chest. She hadn't told anyone what happened. Not her roommate. Not the other crew members. Not even her reflection in the mirror. The moment lived inside her now, quietly reshaping the way she moved through space. She felt like she was walking underwater, aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every inch of who she used to be. Flight NE 218 to Seattle. Full flight. Cloudy skies. Turbulence expected. As passengers began to board, she scanned faces automatically, her voice calm and rehearsed. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." And then she saw him. Aaron. Same gray suit. No tie. No expression. He didn't break stride as he passed her, but he nodded, the kind of nod that says "I see you," even if the words never follow. He took his seat in 3A. Window. She didn't linger. She couldn't. In the galley, her hands trembled as she checked inventory. She told herself it was the caffeine. The nerves. Anything but what it really was. The weight of being seen, fully, with no room to hide behind protocol. Mid-flight, after the first round of service, she found herself in the front cabin, scanning for trash, asking the same 3 questions on loop. Something to drink? Trash? Anything else I can get for you? Aaron looked up. "I'm good," he said, then paused. Actually, do you have a minute? She hesitated, then nodded. They moved to the front galley, away from passenger ears but not from gravity. Every second felt like walking a tightrope barefoot. I thought a lot about what you said, Marissa offered before he could speak. Aaron watched her. I wasn't proud of how I handled it. The baby, the mother. I wasn't being a professional. Or a decent human. I wasn't looking for an apology, he said gently. I know, she whispered. That's why it's real. He tilted his head, curious now. Can I ask you something? She braced herself. Why did you say you don't have children anymore? The air changed. She looked away, fingers tracing the edge of a napkin on the counter. My son, she said after a long pause. Eli. He passed away when he was 3. Aaron said nothing. She didn't need him to. Fever. Complications. It started like nothing. A small cold. Then the hospital. Then, just silence. Her voice didn't shake, but her spine did. I never talk about him, she continued. Not at work. Not anywhere. I thought if I locked it in a box, it would hurt less. Aaron's voice was low. But boxes break. She nodded. That baby on the plane, he sounded like Eli when he cried. Same pitch, same rhythm. And I think, when I heard it, something cracked. Not out of anger. Out of memory. Aaron's eyes softened. It's strange, she said, her voice quieter now. I used to be the one people went to when things got chaotic on flights. The one who calmed parents, distracted kids, held hands during turbulence. He studied her face. And then you stopped. She met his eyes. I didn't stop. I buried it. Because when Eli died, I thought, how can I comfort strangers when I couldn't even save my own son? The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was holy. A stillness born not from awkwardness, but from recognition. Aaron finally spoke. I meant what I said. That crying, it's life. Loud, messy, inconvenient life. And I envy every parent who still gets to hear it. Marissa nodded, tears caught just behind her eyes. You're a good flight attendant, he added. But more than that, you're a human who forgot she's allowed to grieve and still show kindness. The words didn't feel like criticism. They felt like permission. She wiped her eyes, smiling faintly. Thank you. For not reporting me. For seeing something I didn't want to see in myself. I didn't need to report you, he said. Life already gave you the wake-up call. I just made sure you didn't sleep through it. And just like that, the moment passed. But something stayed behind. A softness. A seed. A path back to something she thought was lost for good. The flight landed in Seattle just after dusk, the city washed in rain, streets glistening under amber lights. Passengers shuffled out quickly, eager to reunite with waiting families or rush toward connecting gates. But Marissa lingered in the cabin long after the last bag had been pulled from the overhead bin. She needed the silence. She needed the echo of what Aaron had said to settle inside her before she stepped back into the blur of airport life. Boxes break. The words wouldn't leave her. That night, in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed staring at the sterile carpet, the hum of the AC pressing against her ears. She hadn't thought of Eli in months, not like this, not in detail. She usually avoided it. She avoided the photos. She avoided the memory of his laugh, the way his curls bounced when he ran. She had built a fortress around the loss, convinced it was the only way to keep herself upright. But Aaron's voice had pierced the walls. And the fortress felt thinner now. The next morning, before the crew briefing, she found herself scrolling through her phone. Through old photos she told herself she had deleted but hadn't. Eli in a red sweater, cheeks flushed, gripping a toy plane in his tiny hand. She stared until her chest tightened so much she thought she might actually choke. She put the phone down, closed her eyes, and whispered into the emptiness. "I'm sorry, baby. I never should have hidden you away." Her next assignment came quickly, a red-eye back to New York. Packed flight, tired passengers, crying babies, and anxious flyers all pressed together. Exactly the kind of chaos she usually dreaded. But something shifted. Midway through the flight, a woman with a toddler struggled to carry a diaper bag and calm her child at the same time. Marissa felt the old instinct rise in her chest, the instinct she had buried. This time, she didn't silence it. "Here, let me help you," she said softly, kneeling beside the woman. She held the little boy for a moment, bouncing him gently on her hip while the mother reorganized the bag. The boy laughed, a high-pitched sound that startled her, because for a split second, it sounded like Eli. But instead of breaking her, it filled her with warmth. A reminder. A gift. Passengers noticed. Some smiled. Some whispered. But for Marissa, it wasn't about them. It was about remembering that kindness didn't need perfection. It just needed courage. After service was complete, she caught a glimpse of herself in the lavatory mirror. She almost didn't recognize the expression on her own face. Softer. Less guarded. Like someone who had finally remembered who she was before the grief took over. When they landed in New York, she stepped off the plane into the terminal, tired but strangely lighter. And waiting near the gate, as if the universe wanted to make sure the lesson stuck, was Aaron Caldwell. Not in a suit this time. Just a black sweater and jeans, luggage by his side. "You're everywhere," she said, half smiling. He shrugged. "So are you." They walked together down the terminal, neither in a rush. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, familiar. "You seemed different on that flight," he said finally. "Lighter." "I remembered who I was," she answered. "I don't think I'd let myself be her for a long time." He nodded, thoughtful. "Grief does that. But you can't live your whole life inside the shadow of what you lost." "I know," she whispered. And she did. At the escalator, their paths diverged, his toward the lounge, hers toward crew operations. Before parting, Aaron turned to her. "You don't need my approval," he said. "But I want you to know, what I saw today reminded me why I built this airline. To move people, not just from city to city, but from one part of themselves to another. You did that tonight." She stood still, throat tight, watching him disappear into the crowd. And for the first time in years, she believed him. Back in her small apartment in Queens, Marissa sat cross-legged on the floor with a shoebox she hadn't opened in nearly 5 years. She had almost forgotten it existed, buried at the back of her closet beneath old uniforms and the kind of shoes you never wear but can't throw away. The box was faded, taped around the edges, soft from years of being moved but never touched. She pulled it closer and ran her fingers across the lid. For a long time, she didn't open it. Just stared, like it might bite, like the memories inside would spill out and drown her. Finally, she peeled back the tape. Inside, there were pieces of another life. A hospital bracelet, small enough to fit a doll. A blanket patterned with tiny blue airplanes. A photo of Eli, only 2 days old, with eyes too wide for someone so new to the world. Marissa pressed the photo to her chest, rocking slightly as if the body still remembered what it felt like to soothe a child who wasn't there anymore. For years she told herself she had to keep moving forward, that revisiting the past meant losing the fragile control she'd built. But tonight, she didn't want control. Tonight, she wanted truth. She whispered his name. Once. Twice. Over and over until the sound no longer broke her, but steadied her. "Eli. I miss you. I'm sorry I thought forgetting would mean healing." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "You were here. You mattered. And I'm not going to hide you anymore." It felt like a vow. Not to resurrect what was gone, because life doesn't give back what it takes, but to carry him differently. Not as a shadow, but as light. The next day, on a layover in Chicago, she sat with her crew at a cafe near the hotel. They joked, complained, traded stories about rude passengers. Usually she played along, masking her fatigue with sarcasm. But this time, when one of them mentioned the difficulty of dealing with crying babies, Marissa surprised herself. "I used to hate it," she admitted, sipping her coffee. "But now, I think it's the sound of survival. I'd rather hear a baby cry than know there's silence where it should be." The table grew quiet. Not judgmental, just reflective. The kind of pause people make when someone tells the truth they didn't expect to hear. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Later that night, in her hotel room, she received an email. Subject: recognition. It was from Aaron Caldwell. Short. Simple. "Your presence on the last 2 flights didn't go unnoticed. You reminded me why this company exists. I know you've been through more than most people can imagine, but the way you turned it into compassion, that's the kind of strength we can't measure with training manuals. Keep showing up like that. People will remember." She stared at the screen, her chest tightening, but not in pain. It felt like air filling lungs that had been collapsed for too long. She didn't reply. Not yet. Some things are better carried in silence. 2 weeks later, during a long haul to Los Angeles, she noticed another mother struggling with her baby. The child's cries echoed down the aisle, restless and sharp. Passengers began shifting, sighing. Marissa felt it again, the weight of 100 eyes waiting for her to fix what couldn't be fixed. She didn't scold. She didn't sigh. She knelt beside the woman, smiled softly, and said, "You're doing great. Do you want me to walk him for a few minutes?" The relief in the mother's face was instant, like someone had lifted the sky from her shoulders. Marissa cradled the baby, swaying gently, humming an old tune she hadn't dared to sing in years, the lullaby she used to hum to Eli. Passengers turned to watch. But instead of irritation, something else passed between them. Recognition. Maybe even tenderness. The baby quieted. The mother whispered thank you with tears in her eyes. And Marissa felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not just duty. Not just professionalism. Grace. That night, lying in her hotel bed, she realized she wasn't just healing for herself. She was healing for every passenger who walked onto her flights carrying invisible boxes of their own. And maybe, just maybe, she could turn her grief into a language of service that went beyond protocol. The morning was crisp, the kind that makes every breath feel sharper, cleaner, as though the world itself is asking you to wake up differently. Marissa walked through the terminal at JFK, her uniform perfectly pressed, her stride steady but slower than usual. Not because she was tired, she was used to exhaustion, but because she felt a quiet gravity about this day. She had been summoned to a meeting. Not unusual for crew members, though usually those meetings meant feedback sessions, procedural updates, or the kind of reminders that blurred together over years of repetition. But this one was different. The email had come directly from headquarters. From Aaron Caldwell's office. She entered the conference room with her hands folded neatly in front of her, the air conditioning humming softly against the windows that overlooked the tarmac. A few executives were seated at the long table, their expressions neutral, professional. Aaron was at the head, not in a suit this time, but a navy blazer, open-collared shirt. Still carrying that calm weight that made people notice without meaning to. "Marissa," he said, standing briefly as she entered. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, unsure of her place here, unsure if this was an ending or a beginning. "Please, sit." She did. There was silence for a moment, the kind that makes your pulse sound louder in your ears. Then Aaron spoke. "I want to tell you why you're here. I don't usually interfere directly with crew matters. But after what I witnessed, twice, I felt this needed to be addressed differently." Her throat tightened. She prepared herself for the words she thought might come, warnings, corrective training, maybe even a termination masked as mutual decision. But Aaron's tone shifted. "I saw something that reminded me of what this company stands for. Or rather, what it should stand for. Empathy. Humanity. Connection. And I saw it in you." She blinked. "On that first flight, yes, you lost patience. You let something slip that hurt someone who didn't deserve it. But what struck me wasn't the mistake. It was what happened after. Most people hide when confronted. Most people double down, defend, or pretend nothing happened. You didn't. You faced it. And then, you changed. Her breath caught in her chest. Aaron glanced at the executives around him, then back to her. I've heard reports since then. About how you've been handling passengers. About how you've been showing up. You've become an example, not because you're flawless, but because you're honest. And because you turned pain into something useful. Marissa looked down at her lap. Her fingers twisted slightly, but her voice, when it came, was steady. I don't think of myself as an example, she said. I think of myself as someone who failed, and is still trying not to. Aaron leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Marissa, everyone fails. The difference is what you do afterward. You took the hardest thing a human can carry, loss, and instead of letting it make you harder, you're learning to let it make you softer. That is rare. And it's the kind of leadership we need in this company. The word startled her. Leadership. She had never thought of herself that way. She had thought of herself as surviving, functioning, managing, but never leading. Aaron continued. I want to propose something. It's not just a promotion. It's a program. A new initiative. I want you to help us train crew members differently. Less about reciting safety procedures and more about embodying compassion. Less about ticking boxes, more about presence. I want you to bring your experience, your story, into a space where it can change how we work. Her chest tightened, but this time not from fear. From possibility. Why me? She asked quietly. Because you understand the cost of silence, he said. And because you know what it means when someone chooses kindness instead of judgment. You've lived both sides. That's exactly why people will listen to you. She swallowed, eyes stinging. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. No one ever is, he said. But ready isn't the point. Willing is. For a long moment, she didn't answer. She looked out the window at the planes lined up on the runway, each one carrying strangers who would laugh, cry, argue, fall asleep, all in the same sky, all at the mercy of a crew they might never remember. She thought of Eli. She thought of his laugh, his tiny hand gripping hers. She thought of the years she tried to erase him, the fortress of silence that kept her from even humming a lullaby. And then she thought of the baby she held on that red-eye flight, the way his cries had softened into sleep in her arms, the way her own song had finally been set free. She turned back to Aaron. I'll do it, she said. But not as someone who has all the answers. Only as someone who finally stopped hiding. Aaron's expression softened into something like pride. That's all I ask. The meeting ended, but something had begun. Months later, Marissa stood in front of a small group of new hires in a training room. Not in uniform, not behind a beverage cart, but at a podium. She told them stories. Not the polished ones from the manuals, but the real ones, the nights when she almost broke, the passengers who taught her more than textbooks ever could, the mistakes that cut deeper than they should have. She told them about empathy. She told them about presence. And, for the first time in public, she told them about Eli. The room was silent when she finished, not from awkwardness, but from weight. From resonance. She could see it in their eyes, the recognition, the way truth reverberates through people whether they want it to or not. Afterward, one young trainee lingered. She looked nervous, almost trembling. My daughter passed away last year, the trainee whispered. I thought I had to keep it a secret. Hearing you talk, it made me feel less alone. Marissa placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You don't have to carry it in silence. You can carry it in service. That's what I'm learning. When the trainee nodded, tears brimming, Marissa felt something settle inside her. Not closure. Grief doesn't offer that. But purpose. Later, walking across the terminal, she caught sight of Aaron at a distance. He raised his hand in a small wave. She returned it, a faint smile curving her lips. And as she walked toward her next gate, suitcase rolling behind her, uniform pressed, heart steady, she realized something she hadn't dared admit before. She was no longer afraid of the sound of crying. Because to her, it no longer meant chaos. It meant life. And life, messy, painful, loud, inconvenient life, was a gift. One she would spend the rest of her days honoring, one flight at a time. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.